Hey little dreamers, ready for a magical bedtime adventure? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a sleepy tale. Let's go. Behind the grand palace, past the marble courtyards and echoing halls, there was a little patch of land that no one seemed to care about. It wasn't on any map. No gardener ever tended it. The royal cats didn't nap there, and the palace children never played near it. It was just there, cracked and dry, always waiting. Most people walked right past without even turning their heads. But not Leora. Each morning, before the sun stretched fully across the sky, Leora slipped through the palace gates with 2 old copper buckets, one in each hand. They clanged gently with each step as she made her way around the back, where the earth crumbled into dust and weeds no longer dared to grow. The buckets were heavy, and her arms always ached, but she never complained. She'd kneel beside the bare ground, lips pressed in concentration, and pour the water out slowly, watching it vanish into the cracks, swallowed up like a secret. She never told anyone why she did it. Maybe even she didn't know for sure. But something about that quiet, forgotten place made her feel peaceful, like something was listening. The wind didn't blow there. No birds sang. Just Leora and her breath and the soft gurgle of water into thirsty dirt. People would say later that the place had always been empty, that it had always been dust. But Leora knew better. Even if she couldn't prove it, even if nothing had ever grown yet. She looked at the ground with soft, serious eyes, then stood, lifting her empty buckets. Tomorrow she'd bring more. The next morning, just like always, Leora returned. The palace was still asleep, wrapped in layers of silk and silence. Her bare feet padded over the cobblestones, the copper buckets swinging gently at her sides, water sloshing with each step. She was smaller than the buckets were wide, and still she carried them, one for each hand, arms straining, back straight. As she reached the edge of the forgotten garden, the first sliver of sunlight crept over the rooftops. She knelt without a word. The soil looked no different, still cracked, still colorless, still impossibly dry. No flowers, no green, no life. She poured the water out in slow circles, like drawing invisible patterns on the earth. The soil darkened for just a moment, before quickly fading back into the same tired dust. It always did that. 4 days and weeks and longer. And still she came. Sometimes she whispered to it. Sometimes she hummed songs she only half remembered. And sometimes she was silent, just listening, as though something deep underground was waiting for her voice. A breeze passed, soft and warm, stirring the edge of her dress. She looked up at the sky. It hadn't rained in over a month. Even the clouds seemed to have given up. Far behind her, inside the palace, morning bells began to chime. Somewhere a cook was clattering pans. Somewhere else, someone opened a window and glanced down. But Leora was already rising, brushing dust from her knees, lifting her buckets, now empty again. She didn't know if it mattered. She didn't know if it would ever change. But she knew this. Tomorrow she would bring water again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because maybe, just maybe, something unseen was listening. From behind sheer silk curtains, high up in the palace corridors, people watched her. They didn't say her name. Most didn't even know it. To them, she was just that strange girl who wandered behind the walls each day with those old mismatched buckets. Servants paused in their sweeping to chuckle. Kitchen maids whispered while slicing fruit. Even a few young nobles smirked from their balconies, wine cups in hand. "She's watering dust," someone scoffed. "Maybe she thinks flowers can hear her," another laughed. "She'll break her back before anything grows." They never said it to her face, of course. But they watched, always watched. from behind their curtains and columns and polished glass. And always with the same amusement, that quiet, superior tone people use when they're very sure of something. And what they were sure of was this: nothing grew out there. That patch of ground behind the palace was cursed, some said. Or maybe just useless. It had been barren since before the current queen was born. Too shaded, too shallow, too stubborn. So why waste water on it? Why waste effort? Why waste time? Leora never looked up at the watchers. Or maybe she did once, but not anymore. She had learned that smiles could sting, and words, even whispered ones, could grow heavy like stones in her chest. So instead she kept her eyes low, her pace steady, her hands busy. They thought she didn't notice, but she did. She heard the laughter. She saw the sideways glances. And she felt the weight of it all pressing down, just like the sun pressed down on the cracked earth beneath her knees. But she watered anyway. Not for them. Not even for flowers. Just because it felt right. One morning, as golden light spilled gently across the rooftops, something changed. Leora knelt as always, settling between the same tired cracks and pale dust. She poured water into the familiar hollow where the soil had sunk into itself over time, expecting nothing more than silence and thirst. But just as her hand brushed the earth, she paused. There, barely visible, smaller than her thumbnail, was a whisper of green. At first, she thought it was a trick of light. A glint of dew, maybe. But no, it was real. A single, delicate shoot curling out of the ground, no taller than a blade of grass. Its green was so soft, it almost looked silver, and it trembled with the slightest breath of wind. Leora stared. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply let her breath slow and her heart steady, afraid that any sound might frighten it away. 4 days and days and more, she had watered empty soil. And now there was this beginning, maybe, and nearly nothing that felt like everything. She leaned closer and whispered something. Not a spell, not a prayer, just a thank you. The tiny shoot trembled again. If anyone else had looked, they might not have seen it. They might have stepped on it or scoffed at it or never noticed at all. But Leora saw, and that was enough. She placed a small stone beside it to remember the spot. Then she smiled just a little. It wasn't proof, not yet. Not enough to show anyone. But it was there. The garden had listened. And now, perhaps it had answered. She rose, lifted her buckets, and walked away without a single word. But inside her chest bloomed a warmth as soft and trembling as the green she left behind. The next day she came earlier than usual. The sky was still lavender with sleep, and the stars had only just begun to fade. Leora tiptoed past the guards, who barely noticed her anymore, and made her way through the dewless grass. Her buckets were full again, sloshing softly with each careful step. She was eager, quietly, wonderfully eager. When she reached the hidden patch, she set the buckets down gently and knelt beside the small stone she'd placed the day before. There was the sprout, still standing, still green, still reaching. She smiled so wide it almost hurt. From that moment on, the garden wasn't just a place she visited. It became her secret world. A world where nothing was expected and everything was possible. She began speaking to it more often, naming each little patch of earth, drawing tiny symbols with her fingers in the dirt. She started singing while she watered, just barely above a whisper. The weeds, which had once stood brittle and sharp, now seemed to lean in slightly, listening. She imagined the garden had a heartbeat. She imagined the ground breathed slowly when no one was looking. She imagined that maybe, just maybe, it was trying to remember what it felt like to grow. Still no one else noticed. They walked past just as they always had. Some still laughed. Some still whispered. Some simply didn't see her at all. But Leora didn't care. She had something they didn't. Oh. And she carried it with her. Not in her pockets or her hands, but in the way she stepped carefully around every corner of the garden, in the way she refilled her buckets without complaint, and in the way she returned again and again. 'Cause she believed. And belief, like water, can bloom anything. Days passed. Then weeks. The sky stayed the same. Blue, wide and empty. No clouds wandered by. No breeze cooled the stone paths. No dew kissed the palace rooftops. The air hung still, thick with the scent of dryness. Even the fountains, once cheerful with their bubbling songs, began to gurgle low and tired, like old men sighing in their sleep. Servants carried pitchers more carefully now. Maids were scolded for wasting rinse water. Even the palace dogs, once sleek and playful, panted in shaded corners, their tongues dry. Still no rain came. People began to look to the sky more often, as though begging it to blink. But it didn't. The clouds had vanished. The wind had forgotten the way. And the sun grew hotter, heavier, more unforgiving with each passing day. In the village beyond the palace, wells ran low. Farmers whispered in worry. The air buzzed with dust and impatience. People began to argue about buckets, about timing, about whether or not they should prepare for something worse. And through it all, Leora kept watering. Every morning, just as always, she brought her buckets. The path to the hidden patch grew hotter beneath her feet, and the handles bit deeper into her hands. But she didn't stop. She never even slowed. The little sprout had grown taller now, joined by another, a tiny pair of leaves that leaned together like secrets. No one else knew. No one else believed. But she did. While others watched the skies, she watched the earth. While others rationed and measured, she poured freely. Because something in her heart whispered that even in silence, even in drought, something beautiful was growing. And sometimes you don't wait for the rain. You become it. Even the queen's roses had begun to droop. Her prized garden, once bursting with every color under the sun, was now a shadow of its former splendor. The velvety petals curled at the edges. The once sweet air that lingered near her fountains now smelled of brittle stems and old dust. Gardeners fanned the flowers, whispered to them, even tried ice water from the cellar. But nothing helped. The marble pathways, lined with once blushing blossoms, now bore only faded blooms and scorched leaves. The queen walked slowly among them, her fingers brushing over thorns that no longer guarded anything worth keeping. "These were my mother's," she murmured once to a servant, though no one had asked. "They've never wilted before." She didn't raise her voice. Royals rarely do. But the way she moved, soft, slow, and uncertain, spoke louder than orders ever could. From her high balcony, the queen glanced down at the palace grounds. She saw the empty courtyards, the silent fountains, and far off in the corner, something moving. A small figure with 2 buckets, disappearing around the back. She tilted her head. But a voice called her name, and she turned away. In her garden, flowers gasped and bent. The scent of decay was delicate, but undeniable. Even the butterflies had left. And the queen, dressed in gowns stitched with petal patterns, stood among them like a ghost of spring. She did not know what to do. No one did. The palace was quiet. The kingdom was dry. And even beauty, once effortless and abundant, now came at a cost. But behind the palace, where no footsteps echoed and no marble paths led, someone kept watering. And the land, though still silent, had begun to listen. In the town beyond the palace gates, the thirst became real. Carts that once rattled with full jugs now rolled half empty. their clay vessels bumping softly against each other like hollow drums. Children walked beside their mothers with dusty cheeks and empty cups, their voices quieter than they used to be. Even laughter, which used to ring through the square like bells, faded into whispers. The main well, once deep and generous, now made strange sounds when the rope was lowered. The bucket returned slower, heavier, and sometimes dry. People began to take turns, waiting in long, winding lines before dawn. Arguments broke out. "His bucket's too full," someone snapped. "She came back twice today," another hissed. "We'll run out," muttered a third, eyes dark with fear. The air smelled of warm stone and distant worry. Animals grew thin. Laundry was scrubbed with leftover soup water. A merchant even sold rainwater in tiny glass jars, at a price so high, only the nobles could afford a sip. And still no rain. Inside the palace, the servants whispered of rationing. Bathing water was counted. Cooking pots were smaller. The kitchens baked more bread, less stew. Everyone waited for the sky to change. Everyone hoped the clouds would return. But they didn't. And through it all, Leora walked. She walked past the well. She walked past the eyes and the whispers. She filled her buckets just like always, even as others shook their heads. "She wastes it," someone muttered. "She pours it on dead dirt." But she didn't pause. Because where others saw waste, she saw wonder. She didn't believe in the sky anymore. She believed in roots. She believed in stillness. She believed in something growing, even if no one else could see it. By now, every step Leora took left a small puff of dust behind her. The palace grounds had grown bone dry, and even the birds had quieted, perching motionless in the rafters as if conserving breath. But each morning, just as she always had, Leora came with her buckets. Her arms were sore now, constantly sore. The copper handles had left faint red lines across her palms, and her shoulders ached before she even left her room. But she still carried them, both buckets full, both sloshing gently with every determined step. She passed townsfolk dragging their feet, their faces drawn with fatigue and thirst. Some looked away. Others stared openly, their eyes hard and tired. A few whispered under their breath, less cruel now, more confused. Why was she still doing it? Even the guards didn't stop her anymore. They simply watched, leaning against the palace gate, silent and sweating. One day, a small boy near the well looked up at her and asked, "Why do you give your water to the dirt?" She paused for only a second, then offered the gentlest answer she could manage. "Because something might be waiting." He frowned, too young to understand. But she smiled at him anyway and kept walking. Behind the palace, her hidden patch of earth still looked mostly empty. But she saw it differently now. She saw the tiniest shoots rising, almost invisible. She saw colors in the leaves that hadn't yet opened. She saw promise. And when she poured the water, it felt like she was feeding a dream. Not hers alone, but one the land had been holding on to long before she ever arrived. The world around her was drying up. But her garden was beginning to hum. Quietly, patiently, just beneath the surface. High above the courtyard, behind panes of colored glass and the woven shade of the royal lattice, the king stood still. He was not a man who often noticed small things. His world was filled with scrolls and council meetings, with velvet chairs and ceremonial cups of wine. But lately his world had changed. The drought had dried more than the wells. It had dried the joy from his halls, the ease from his meals, the shine from his crown. He hadn't smiled in weeks. And yet, he found himself drawn to the window. Each morning at the same hour, he stood behind the curtain and watched. He didn't know her name. He had never spoken to her. But there she was again, just a little girl, slight and steady, dragging 2 copper buckets through the dust. Always the same rhythm, always the same path. She walked like it mattered. She poured water onto dead ground like it was gold. The first time he saw her do it, he almost called a guard to stop her. Waste, he thought. Foolish. But he didn't speak. He just kept watching. And day after day, the girl returned. Her dress grew dustier, her arms more strained, but her steps never faltered. There was no audience, no applause, no reward. She watered emptiness like it was treasure. And something about that made the king uneasy. Or maybe it made him curious. He wasn't sure which. He had ruled over armies and gardens and festivals, but he had never ruled over devotion like that. As she turned the corner out of view, buckets swinging, he leaned forward just slightly, as if afraid to lose sight of her. She didn't look up, not once, but still he watched, and somewhere deep inside him something stirred. By the end of that week, the wind had changed, but not in the way anyone hoped. It wasn't the cool, promising breeze of a coming storm. It was dry, bone-dry, and sharp like breath from an oven. It scraped through alleyways and tossed dust into eyes. It picked up brittle leaves and dead petals and scattered them across palace floors like confetti from a forgotten celebration. Shutters creaked. Cloth whipped on clotheslines. People wrapped scarves over their mouths and narrowed their eyes. The wind didn't cool. It only reminded everyone how empty the sky still was. Even the queen's voice had grown hoarse. She no longer walked her gardens. She sat instead, motionless beneath a canopy, fanning herself with wilting leaves, her gaze distant. And through that wind, every single morning, Leora walked. Some days, it blew so hard she had to grip her buckets tight or risk losing them. Her hair flew wild around her face, and grit stung her cheeks. But still she came. Still she watered. At the hidden patch, she knelt low to the ground to shield her tiny plants from the blowing dust. She cupped her hands around them like a prayer. She whispered to them, not for them to grow faster, but just to know they weren't alone. Because the world was getting louder. But she knew that growing things prefer quiet. In that gusty silence, she poured her water. One bucket, then the other. The ground accepted it greedily. And though she couldn't see it yet, deep below the surface, roots were threading like threads of hope. Behind her, the palace groaned in the wind. But before her, the garden held still. The wind could not reach what was buried. And neither could doubt. It happened just before dawn. The air was cooler than usual, not by much, but enough to make the leaves tremble and the sky blush a little earlier than normal. The horizon glowed a sleepy lavender, and for the first time in weeks, the ground did not feel brittle beneath Leora's feet. She walked with her buckets as she always did, the same soft path behind the palace. Her dress fluttered around her ankles, her arms sore from 100 mornings of lifting, pouring, believing. And then she froze. She dropped both buckets, not out of clumsiness, but wonder. Because the garden, the place she had watered for so long, the place that had once been nothing but dust and silence, was alive. It had happened in the night. Somehow, without fanfare or warning, the soil had burst open. What had been bare earth now shimmered with color. Blooms of lavender and bluebell, of gold-flecked white and soft rose, curled upward toward the light. Leaves unfurled with dew still clinging to their edges. Vines wove between stones and the air smelled sweet. Oh, clean. It was impossible. It was magic. She stepped forward slowly, as though afraid it would vanish if she moved too fast. Her feet sank into soft moss where hard dirt had once cracked. Tiny flowers bloomed in clusters shaped like stars. Some glowed faintly, others shimmered as if dusted with silver. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She simply let them fall, like water, into the place that had grown under her care. Behind her, the palace remained still. The world hadn't woken yet, but the garden had, and for the first time it didn't whisper, sang softly, joyfully, to the girl who had never stopped believing. The garden did not stay secret for long. By mid-morning, word had begun to ripple through the palace like ripples in a well. A servant saw it first, a quiet boy on his way to fetch water, who froze at the sight of glowing flowers growing where only dust had lived the day before. He told a cook, who told a guard, who told a noble, and soon the news spread like fire on dry grass. They came in trickles at first, curious maids and half-awake stable boys, then guards in shining armor, then fine-robed counselors, then the nobles. By noon, a crowd had formed. They stood behind the broken wall or gathered under shaded parasols, whispering, pointing, inching closer but afraid to step too far. They saw a young girl sitting cross-legged in the middle of it all, her dress stained at the hem, her hair tangled with petals. But none of them laughed now. The garden was too strange, too lovely. Some flowers changed color when the wind touched them. Others seemed to hum softly, like bees in a dream. Vines curled protectively around stones that used to be bare. And in the center, where the earth was darkest and richest, a single tree had begun to sprout, small but unmistakable. They murmured, "It wasn't here yesterday. Who did this? Is this some trick?" But no one moved forward. No one dared touch anything. Leora didn't speak. She only smiled. She sat with her hands in her lap, quietly watching the blooms sway. She looked like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. Behind her, the garden shimmered with life. Before her, the crowd watched, not with laughter this time, but with awe. Something had changed, and everyone could feel it. By late afternoon, the crowd had grown thick. The palace gates stood open now, and townsfolk wandered in, tentatively at first, clutching hats and holding their children close. But as word spread, more arrived. Bakers with flour on their sleeves, smiths wiping sweat from their brows, farmers blinking in disbelief. And in the middle of it all stood Leora. Nobles gathered near her, their robes brushing the edge of the blooms. They circled like curious birds, not sure whether to bow, to scold, or to applaud. One stepped forward, a tall man with silver chains on his shoulders. "What did you do here?" he asked, voice low, as if afraid to startle the petals. Leora looked up at him with sun-dappled eyes. "I watered it." Murmurs broke out. "Watered it? In the drought? Why didn't anyone stop her?" Leora tilted her head. "You can't stop someone from hoping." More whispers. Someone scribbled notes on a scroll. Another crouched to examine a glowing stem. A pair of young girls from the village gasped aloud when a flower bloomed right in front of them. "How long has it been here?" someone asked. But no one could answer. Leora didn't explain. How could she? How could she put into words what it meant to believe in something before it was real? To give without knowing if anything would grow. So she just sat again among the petals, letting her silence speak for her. One noblewoman leaned close, squinting at the soft green leaves and whispered, "But how is this possible?" Leora met her eyes and shrugged. "Maybe it always was," she said. "It just needed someone to see it." And with that, she turned back to her garden, as if the crowd no longer mattered. Because really, it never had. That evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the hills, something extraordinary happened. A sound bubbled up from the earth. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a soft, gurgling hush like laughter caught in stone. First no one noticed. The nobles were still whispering, and the townsfolk were still wandering the edge of the miracle garden. But Leora heard it. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing, and stepped toward the moss-covered stone near the base of the new sapling. The air there was cooler, like a breath in a fevered room. Then a drop. A single, clear droplet rolled down the stone's side. Another followed. Then a thin stream like silver ribbon. From between the cracks, water began to well up, pooling gently, forming a little spring that shimmered as it grew. Gasps echoed around her. "It's water!" someone cried. Children rushed forward, only to be gently held back by guards who, just moments ago, had no idea what to guard. The queen's advisor dropped to one knee, touching the pool with trembling fingers. "It's fresh," he whispered, "and cold." The water ran faster now, a soft stream flowing from the hidden ground, weaving past flower roots and into a natural channel that curved down the slope, heading miraculously toward the palace. The garden had not just bloomed, had given something back. From dry earth, from silence, from all that was forgotten, life had returned, and still Leora said nothing. She knelt beside the stream, cupping her hands, watching it flow as though greeting an old friend. The water caught the last rays of the setting sun and glowed gold in her palms. Behind her, someone whispered, "She's the one who brought it back." But Leora just smiled, because she knew the truth. The garden had always been waiting. By morning, the garden's water had reached the palace gates. It moved slowly through the carved stones and winding grooves of the land, slipping beneath the hedges and fountains that had long run dry. The marble basins, dusty from disuse, began to shimmer once more. First a trickle, then a thread, then a rush. Fountains bubbled, birds returned. And in the kitchens, the cooks wept as they poured fresh water into their empty pots. The palace bloomed in a different way now, not with flowers but with laughter. Servants splashed one another from silver basins. Children cupped their hands to sip the cool spring. A long line formed at the spout nearest the stables, and no one complained about waiting. The queen walked her garden again, now pale with wonder. She paused near a flowering vine that had crept in from the hidden patch, its blossoms foreign, its scent unfamiliar. She touched one gently and whispered, "Where did you come from?" The answer, of course, was not for her alone. Down at the source, the stream continued to pour from the once barren earth, winding past petals and roots, past rocks that now gleamed with moss and new life. And Leora, she simply sat in the shade of the small tree, its leaves trembling softly above her. She no longer needed to water the soil. The garden was doing that on its own now, sustaining itself, growing in all directions. But still she came, not out of habit, but reverence. Others came too, in quiet waves. They didn't bring buckets. They brought seeds. They knelt in the dirt and asked her where to place them. And for every one that was planted, the garden grew, outward, upward, deeper. Because once one person believes, others will follow. And magic, like water, flows where it's welcomed. It wasn't long before people began to call her the girl who saved the garden. Though, of course, they had once called her other things. Foolish, they had whispered. Strange, they had smirked. A waste, they had scoffed. Now those same voices softened their words, shifted their tones. They stood straighter when she passed, offered nods or awkward bows. Some even brought her gifts. Woven flower crowns, sweet rolls wrapped in cloth, little pins shaped like petals. Leora accepted each one gently, though she still wore her same old dress with a faded lavender sash. She had not asked for praise. And she did not seek attention. She simply continued to sit with her garden each morning, watching how it changed. New colors bloomed daily, blues no sky had ever held, pinks softer than silk. Even the tree had grown taller, its branches curving over her like a roof of dreams. And beneath that canopy, Leora welcomed all who came, not with grand speeches or titles, but with a quiet nod, a gentle hand, a space beside her in the shade. People began to bring stories to her. Heroes, hopes, secrets. They didn't always speak them aloud. But something about sitting near her made the words easier to carry. She just listened, they'd say later. Like the garden does. The king himself walked through the path one early evening, robes brushing wildflowers. He did not bring his crown. He did not bring his guards. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, then sat beside her. They said nothing, but his eyes were softer when he stood again. And from then on, no one laughed at her buckets, because everyone knew. She hadn't just watered the dirt. She had taught them all how to believe in something no one else could see. The queen came quietly. No fanfare, no trumpets, no velvet train sweeping behind her. Just a soft robe of faded rose, her hair tied simply, and her eyes, tired but full of something gentle. She walked the winding path like anyone else, brushing her fingers against blooming stalks, ducking beneath vines that had begun to spill over the old stone wall. Her guards stood at a distance, unsure whether to follow. She waved them back. The garden was not a place for crowns. When she reached the clearing, she found Leora kneeling beside a ring of new blossoms, ones that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. The girl didn't turn. She didn't need to. The queen knelt too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Birds sang in nearby branches. A bee circled lazily between them. Then the queen reached out, her gloved hand hovering over a bloom as soft as breath. "May I?" she asked. Leora nodded. Gently, the queen touched the petals. Her eyes welled not with sadness but with memory. "These smell like my mother's garden," she whispered. Before everything got too complicated, Leora didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached into the fold of her dress and offered the queen a seed. Unremarkable, just a speck of promise. The queen stared at it, as if it held the weight of everything she'd forgotten. "Will it grow?" she asked. "If you water it," Leora replied. No fancy wisdom, no magic incantation, just a truth she had carried in her hands for weeks. The queen smiled, not regally, not politely, but truly. And together, side by side, they planted it. Just a small hole in the soft earth. Just one seed. But in that moment, it felt like the most important thing in the world. Soon, planting became a morning ritual. Not just for Leora and the queen, but for everyone. Children came with satchels of gathered seeds. Some wild, some borrowed from tired gardens. Farmers brought soil from home, sprinkling it around the edges. Servants carved tiny markers to name each sprout. Even palace guards, awkward at first, took turns carrying water buckets again, those smaller, lighter ones than Leora's had been. No one ordered it. No one assigned roles. Simply happened. And Leora became their quiet guide. She never stood at the center, never barked instructions. She simply showed, with her hands, with her gaze, with her quiet care, how to listen to the ground, how to feel when soil was ready, how to press a seed in gently like tucking in a sleeping thought. Some days she said nothing at all, but her silence always meant something. She taught the baker's daughter how to shade tender roots with leaves. She helped a young stable boy find the perfect spot where the soil felt warmest. She even sat with the queen again, planting a row of flowers neither of them could name. The garden stretched wider now. It was no longer a patch or a corner or a secret. It was a place of gathering, a place of peace. And as it grew, so did something else, something harder to see. Eagerness, patience, joy without reason. The drought hadn't ended. Not yet. The skies were still dry. But the people weren't waiting for rain anymore. They had found something else to believe in, something beneath their feet. Because Leora had shown them. You don't wait for life to return. You plant it gently every day. And you water it, even if no one else can see it yet. The garden never truly ended. Not in shape nor in season. It spilled over stones and climbed up broken walls. It whispered through cracks in the palace foundation and curled around statues long forgotten. Some plants bloomed by sun, others glowed only at night. There were flowers that sang when touched, moss that stayed cool even in heat, and tiny trees that grew fruit tasting like memory. Paths were made, not of marble, but of soft dirt and scattered petals. Children walked them barefoot, their feet brushing moss and their hands trailing ribbons of leaves. Elders came to sit and rest. Lovers whispered beneath new blossoms. People came not for answers, but for stillness. Leora no longer needed to bring her buckets. She still came every morning, of course, but now she came with seeds in her pocket and a soft scarf wrapped around her shoulders. She was older now, just a little, but her eyes still held that same gentle brightness, the same quiet certainty. The palace gates stayed open. There were no guards at the garden's edge. No signs, no rules, just a space where things could grow. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a way of remembering what mattered, of seeing things before they were real, of believing without proof. And Leora, she remained its quiet heart. Each evening, as the sun bowed low and the sky blushed gold, she walked the path slowly. She knelt to touch a leaf. She brushed soil from a stone. And sometimes, if you listened very closely, you could hear her humming, soft and low. The same song she had sung back when the ground was bare. Because the garden remembered. And so did she. The garden sleeps now, dreamers. The blossoms curl under the moonlight, and the vines stretch slowly in their sleep. The palace is quiet. The town is still. And the little girl who once carried water through dust, she's resting too in a patch of soft grass, surrounded by petals that glow like stars. Let your breath slow, your thoughts settle, your heart grow quiet. Because like Leora's garden, some things bloom best in stillness. Close your eyes now. The seeds have been planted. The earth is listening. And tomorrow, just like magic, everything will begin again.